Hey guys, hope you're well. Sorry about starting the stream a little bit late. Unfortunately, I just get finished with work. But in terms of free hit team, it's exactly the same as it was. So I am planning to go with quite a few gambles, I would say, compared to usual, and that's simply because I really prefer some of the options that you can get this week for a little bit of upside, especially if you're to gamble some starts. So Isak, of course, and Gakpo are probably the notable examples. Martinelli, I wouldn't say is too much of a gamble. I really do think he starts. I don't think there's an issue with him. But Jesus, of course, is someone who's been very popular in free hit draws, someone that I'm not going for simply because I actually have always preferred the forwards this week than the midfielders. As you can see, for that reason, Madison's on my bench. A lot of people will be thinking about Andreas and Bowen as well, even as but all those options didn't really come into my mind. And as soon as Gakpo became a serious contender in my draft, because I think he can get another start in this match versus Nottingham Forest, I sort of disregarded the opportunity to go for another midfielder outside of Arsenal and Liverpool. So that's the state of my draft. But of course, let's just go on to the YouTube questions. So, hey JP, hope you're doing well. Struggling to pick between Gakpo and Jota, pros, cons with Firmino injured and Klopp hinting Nunes benching. Interested to see that you've mentioned that there's a hint of Nunes bench. Is that more the case that you think that Klopp has been really complimentary of his starting 11 and what that means for both Jota and Gakpo starting? I think Jota's a good gamble to start, but kind of what I was saying is I still really like. I think Gakpo and Jota are almost equivalent assets for me. So then I look at who would be the alternatives in the midfield and the forward positions. And in my opinion, there are just better alternatives in the forward positions. So I'm happier to go with Gakpo in my draft for that reason. As far as starting Bowen as in Isak, I think Isak is a big gamble. If you have a taste for gambling, I would go for it. Otherwise, I think Eze is a great option. I'm not too high on Bowen, I have to be honest. Geronimo says, hey Fran, I'm set for Game Week 32 and 33 with no free hit. So when should I play it? I'm thinking Game Week 38 because I have 3. Yeah, I think 38 makes sense. 37 also makes sense. 34 makes sense. You have to kind of look at your team and see how many transfers you're making on 34 and 37 to sort of justify that. On 38, it's always interesting to keep a free hit there. I think some people have an overriding logic where they think that, for a lot of teams in the league and a lot of players, there's nothing to play for, such as, for example, if Man City were to win the league already, then you could see a lot of rotation. Haaland might not be useful in your team, so on and so forth. Haaland might also have already broken the Premier League goal scoring record, things like that. But it's hard to say. I think some people have tried things like Game Week 38 3 hits before, and I don't think it's actually worked out as planned. Just listening to some of the insight of managers who've done that sort of stuff in the past. So I feel like you can have a look at your team, assess what it looks like for 34 and 37. I would prioritize using it in those weeks because when you have to make big transfers for those weeks, I think the ceiling is so high that free hitting then it makes more sense as opposed to 38 where things can go calamitously bad. As far as Rio, hope you're doing well. Nice to see you here. Junie Gaming says, hello, Fran. Would you take a -8? Watkins for Solanke and Odegaard for Salah, no free hit. I would not really go out of Watkins this week, personally. I think Watkins is good to go for the next 2 weeks, arguably. And so I don't really like the idea of going for Solanke. Odegaard also is a good player this week, so I'm not sure if I really like that move towards Salah. I would try to look at some players in your team potentially that have weaker fixtures. So if you have someone like Kane, this is probably a good week to go out of him. Nuclear Adams, greetings as well. Hope you're doing well. Lucas says, hi Fran, how are you? You're not using your free hit this week. Do you think this is worth it for a -4 Trent and Solanke in for me and Tony? Yeah, absolutely like those transfers. So Tony has a good fixture this week, but because there's so much upside in going from me to Trent, I'm quite happy for you to do that because I think Solanke and Tony are comparable options. So if we were to, let's say, compare to the previous -8, because Watkins and Solanke are perfectly good players for this week, I don't like it for a -8, but, -4 is different. Geronimo says, we the only ones here. You like both Gakpo and Jota. Maybe you would choose Jota because of Nunez news and Firmino injury. That's interesting. Look, honestly, I would not say Jota's a bad option. I think if you like both players, I'm happy for you to go both of them. Is a 10-man team worth rolling? I think so, Brandon. It really depends on what your 10-man team is, though. Be interested to know what it looks like. Madison for Gakpo with Allison in goal. Ooh, I'm not sure if I really like Allison, for a free hit. Are you thinking, is this Allison for your team going forwards? Because I don't really like Allison on a free hit. Jota or Solanke, I would go Jota, of course. I mean, if you had the option. It really depends, though, because I think when you ask the question, Jota or Solanke, the question always is, who are the alternatives on the Liverpool team that you'd go for? So I think it always has to be looked at as a pairing. So it's like Jota plus someone else versus Solanke plus someone else. So if you could let me know what the comparative pair is, I think we could make a better judgment there. Mikey Gaming says, who should I captain if I don't have Salah? I think Saka is a perfectly good captain. If you have Trent, I would actually probably prefer him. That guy says he'll replace the Newcastle assets. I mean, two wrongs don't make a right, that guy. I believe you also had Brentford defense last week, so let me know how that's going. Shimley says Gakpo scoring a brace. I hope so. JP, what is your Spurs predicted XI? Could it benefit Newcastle? I'm not foreseeing too many changes with Spurs, to be quite honest, and I don't see many changes actually benefiting Newcastle if we were to sort of put that argument out there. Jota and Eze versus Isak and Gakpo. Interesting. So, I actually like Isak and Gakpo, but I think it's a little bit riskier because Eze, I would say, is more nailed than Isak. At this point in time, he's played 90 minutes 3 times in a row for Roy Hodgson. So yeah, I would probably say Jota and Eze is safer, but if you want a bit of a gamble and you like the upside, you want that sort of ceiling that hopefully an Isak start will give you for if he plays like, let's say, 75 minutes of football, then I would prefer the Isak and Gakpo. Remember that, of course, with Gakpo and Jota, I guess there's an equivalent gamble there. So I kind of cross them out as equal options. Watkins is in great form. You've got Watkins, Solanke, and I think that's a fantastic frontline Geronimus, so I wouldn't be worried at all. I've considered Jesus a couple times in my drafts, but it always came down to I think Jesus is still quite comparable to some of the other Arsenal options, whereas what you have to forego in other positions isn't the same. So if, let's say, I dropped one of the Arsenal defenders, I think, especially since I'm not going for another Liverpool player, as in double Liverpool defense plus Trippier, it then goes back to the point of that third defender seems to be quite poor. It almost feels like I have to double up on Crystal Palace, or I have to go for someone like Alex Moreno. And because I do see good chances of that Aston Villa and Brentford game being something like a both teams to score game, that's why I'm a little bit concerned about going for someone like Moreno. And honestly, Leicester have been a terrible side too. I don't really see them keeping a clean sheet. We'll see how that goes, though. Saka plus Trippier / Son plus White. I like Saka plus Trippier more. It's safer, though. The effective ownership is around there. Son, I mean, you're sort of gambling in that situation, I think, for Newcastle to lose their clean sheet, which I think that's tough. If you look at Newcastle this season, they've been tremendous in terms of the home defense and also actually restricting, I would say, explosive hauls from players. So make that of what you will, but I think people haven't actually had crazy underlying numbers either. So I'm not just talking purely about points, but more so the fact that no one has racked up incredible XG versus Newcastle, even Haaland, for example. You like Saka, Trippier, and White, don't fancy Son. Yeah, same sort of reasoning there. I don't think Son is that worth a gamble. I think people are thinking about Son because obviously he's a player that we love, going back historically to previous FPL seasons. So when you look at a player like Son, you think, of course, I want to go for someone like Son, such lethal finishing, but Son has had a pretty poor season this year. Also, 34 of you guys in the chat, thank you guys so much for joining. If you guys could please like and subscribe, that would be lovely. Juni Gaming saying, is having 9 players good for non-free hitting 32? I would say probably not, because also you have to remember that when you take hits on free at 32, it's probably going to be 4 points. Minus 2 points as opposed to -4. Anytime you take -4s for players, you're kind of already getting those 2 appearance points back, unless they're, of course, the defender. Tigsy Smart says, Jota Salah, perfectly fine pairing. That guy says, ouch. What is that related to? Is that the Brentford comment? Sahab says thoughts on Sonaldo. I love Sonaldo, but are you talking about FPL Sonaldo or Sonaldo, the lethal finisher from outside the box? Ben C, do you think Jesus will play? I do think so. I think some people have been rumoring a Trossard start, but I don't think that's going to be the case. JP says Harry Wilson versus Eze. I would go for Eze. I think Harry Wilson, the scary thing with him is that the last 2 matches has been the best minutes that he's gotten all season, and there's no guarantee that he'll continue starting. Whereas with Eze, it's a little bit different because there aren't that many options in the bench that I would say are that appetizing, and his underlying numbers are actually a lot better, and he has been a historical overperformer. Harry Wilson, of course, is perfectly capable of taking a good free kick. We've seen it plenty of times, but I'm not so high on Harry Wilson because I think he's also not on set pieces, unless I'm wrong. Maybe that's changed. Is Andreas still on set pieces when JP is there? Sorry, not when JP is there, but when Harry Wilson's in the team. Jonas says it's only your opinion, but Spurs are in bad form. Son is having a bad season. I mean, it's not an opinion to say that Son is having a bad season. I think it's a fact. he has been one of the, if you look at, for example, data going back 5 to 6 years, Son has been one of the most lethal finishers in the mid-range in the world. But this season, he's sort of fallen back down to what I would consider to be an average amongst elite footballers. So this is clearly a dip in the season for Son, but you could argue that it's a bit of, a tactical sort of happenstance with the change in formation with Conte as well. Because noticeably, I think Kane has actually pushed higher up in the field, particularly during the Conte tenure, and Son has taken different positions compared to previously. Brandon says, your 10-man team is Fabianski, Zuma, Aguerd, Trippier, Shaw, Saka, Martinelli, Salas. I actually think that's a very strong team. Now, of course, you have a couple of hedges there in terms of, let's say, the Bournemouth striker versus the West Ham defense, but it's not too far away. You've got Salah. The only thing I'd say, of course, is you're missing out on Trent, which I would be quite concerned about, but the rest of your team actually looks pretty good. Is this my final draft? I think so, unless we get some last-minute Arsenal news where there are going to be spoilers as to, let's say, Jesus getting benched or things like that, and me considering maybe Trossard potentially, then we could think about that. But I'm not seeing it myself. I don't see myself changing when it comes to the draft. Poor says, is this your final? Sorry, I've already gone. So that Sean says, worth a hit to bring in Saka / Martinelli so that I don't need to field Botman. Interesting question there. So I don't really like taking a hit to bring in Saka Martinelli because one of my concerns next week is that you're almost bringing them in immediately, and then they've got City in the next week, which I don't love that fixture too much for either Saka Martinelli. But ultimately, if you don't want to play Botman, I think that's fine. However, as I said, I think Trent and Salah are the priorities this week, and I think those are the two best transfers that you can have when you're non-free hitting. And if you already have those two players in your team, I would not really consider any more additional transfers. I'd probably still prefer... I'd also have a look at your team, right? Because you're mentioning Saka and Martinelli, but I would need to know what the money in the bank will allow you to do, because you need to think about your future transfers for 33 and then 35 and beyond, because I'm assuming that maybe you'll free hit. It depends on when you're going to free hit as well. Because if you're free hitting on 34, that's going to be another week where you'd have to think about immediately Arsenal on 35, and Arsenal on 34, of course, have a poor fixture. So keeping Martinelli and Saka might be better because on 34, you don't really want to be playing them. So it's up to you. I think you could take that hit if you are really set in stone with free at 34. Anka says, yes, the daytime stream for my time zone. Absolutely. I think this is probably one of the best deadlines for American audiences. I was going to roll a transfer, but would you advise selling Grealish for Gakpo instead of rolling? I would not advise for that. I don't think I would, sadly. I think Grealish is plenty a good asset. The concern with Gakpo as well is I think if you make the transfer for Gakpo, there's a high opportunity that you could see that sort of midweek rest next week. So maybe when Liverpool play their next match in Gameweek 33, there is a high chance that Gakpo could be rotated in much the same way that he was rotated in the Fulham or the Wolves game, and also the West Ham game recently. Son must be like 9 mil. I mean, Son's going to have the price drop for sure. Fionn says, hey bro, thanks for answering your DM. Yeah, absolutely, no worries. Friendly Bane says, is it risky to double up and pass? I don't think it's risky, right? They still have the third best clean sheet odds this week, but I feel like my concern with their defense is what's the ceiling there in terms of the players. So Crystal Palace probably don't make as many saves as some Crystal Palace keepers at least have not been put in situations where they're supposed to make that many saves compared to like a Raya and a Leno this season. So that's one concern there. So I feel like backing Johnson is nice because you get, of course, the expected points from what would be an expected clean sheet percentage that is much higher than some of the other players that I've mentioned, particularly Leno and Raya. But the concern, of course, with the defender is how likely is it that Anderson and Guehi are going to score. I don't think they've shown to be very, very capable set-piece goal scorers as well, compared to someone like, let's say, Gabriel for Arsenal is a great gamble because him and Van Dijk have been very lethal players in the air. Stretching back 2 to 3 seasons already, so that's why I like them as gambles. And then of course you have to look at their teams and how often they actually build chances in terms of corners and things like that, which obviously that's positive for a team like Liverpool and a team like Arsenal, and also really positive when you see the data between Southampton and Nottingham Forest, those two teams, and how often they actually give corners away compared to the league average. So that's what I have to think about. So in that sense, I feel like the defender, right, for the Crystal Palace team Anderson Guehi is quite low ceiling from that aspect. But of course, the clean sheet points is why you see them probably as recommended options. I still like Alex Moreno or Castagna more, just because they probably have a little bit of attacking upside there. Roger says, love the team, desperately want to start Madison. What scenario does he make? I mean, Madison's always going to make the starting 11. Are you asking me in terms of how I would fit Madison in my starting 11? I mean, I feel like Isak is a bit of a risk for me. So if I was going to play Madison, then I would probably just drop Isak. Geronimus says, it seems to me that 13 players from Man City, Man United, Brighton, Hove Albion, Liverpool is the way to go from 34 to 38. Max double fixtures, best fixtures in general. 2 is Lanky, Everson. Thoughts? Yeah, I agree with that generally. I think a lot of us have been building teams like that, right? Like building very Man United heavy teams, moving away from our Arsenal assets. So that's why I also would say it's interesting that if you go for 3 hit 34, I guess you can delay the onset of the Man United assets a little bit further. But I think everyone's going to own Rashford and Shaw naturally. So that's an interesting situation as well. Maybe not necessarily Rashford, because I think a lot of people actually transferred him out, but you'll have to see your situation for 37. Sihab says, do you need to be differential on 3 hit, or is it free? No, I don't think so, right? So the top 10k percentages for a free hit is something like, I think 26% of it has been used. So I'm assuming 60% of people will use a free hit this week. And actually, if you go outside of the top 10k, there's actually more managers within the world who've actually used the free hit. I believe 46% of managers in the world have already used it. So at maximum, I think outside of the top 10k, probably top 100k, you have 55% of people maximum, right, who can be using the free hit. So by being on a free hit itself, you are already getting like at least a minimum 45% advantage. Because I'm imagining if you were able to fill out good teams in previous weeks and you're not free hitting, you have to be taking hits immediately. So you should be already on a green arrow, just because this is the sort of blank game week type scenario of a free hit where your competitors will be using a hit, to go into Salah and Trent, and you yourself will not need to do that. So you'll be a couple points ahead from that aspect. So for example, when the deadline is actually over and live FPL loads up our teams, I would 100% expect you to be on quite a significant green arrow already. And you don't need to be a differential, because remember, it's all about really getting maximum points at the end of the day. I don't see, for example, the need to go for like a 0.1% owned asset. It's not necessary. Just pick the team that you actually think will get the most amount of points. That's the most sensible logic, but it's also the truthful one. John Fish says Kepa, Martinez, Chilwell, Robbo -4 for 10 players. I think so. I think going out of Chelsea makes a lot of sense, and there's nothing wrong really with going out of Chelsea players at this point in time. When you talk about the transfers, though, are you going out of Robbo? Like, I'm a little bit confused. Are you going Kepa to Martinez, Chilwell to Robbo? I don't love Robbo too much, because I think Trent is really worth spending that sort of money on. So I would try and find scenarios where you can try and own Trent. But yeah, I also think that logically, if you go for a -8 even, it's not even that bad, because you're going to get appearance points from your 11th player, hopefully. So I would also even consider that. But of course, think about how that fits in with your strategy in terms of free hitting in the future, or if you've not free hit already, how that sort of interrupts, I suppose, your plans on 34. Joe Diego says, hi, Fran, playing 3 at 34. You have 10 players. You can do Chilwell for a playing defender at the same price, or I can do a -8 and do Haaland / Chilwell and Madison for... Look, I like the -8 for Haaland. It really depends, right? Because I think if you have the money in your team to go from Kane to Haaland, then it actually makes sense to go out of Haaland this week, because you can simply just go out of Kane next week, just adopt Haaland in your team, and you will probably have a very, very good, strong template structure that fits in with 34. Weirdly, I think, yeah, as I said, if you go for those transfers, you might actually consider free hit 37, because in a sense, if you go for those Solanke, Trent, and Salah moves, that would actually probably set your team up better for 3 at 34. Therefore, you can go 37. But you've also mentioned actually right below that you're not going Haaland. So up to you how you play that. I do like the moves though in isolation, and I think as long as you're flexible with when you can use the free hit, then that's fine. How am I sure that Isak will start? How sure am I? I'd probably say like 80% sure. I don't know any Newcastle, inside sources, but he still has looked incredible to me. I think he's still the leading player within that attack. He's gotten a week of rest. We only saw him get rested when there was like a midweek match where he had 3 to 4 days of rest, which is completely different to this scenario. He's had a full week's worth of rest. So I'm pretty happy with Isak starting. I'd probably even push it to 85%. Paulo says, hi, Fran, my attacking trio is Jesus, Ollie Watkins, Isak. I've not heard any news that Jesus will be benched, so I wouldn't be concerned about that. I really like that front line as well. Muddy Thief says, Watkins, Martinelli, Kane, who should I captain? Ooh. I'd probably go for Martinelli, honestly, as a captaincy option. Roger says, yes for your team. Yeah, so I think I gave you the answer in terms of I'd probably drop Isak if I was less of a gambling man, I suppose. Would you have Matters on your free hit? If not, who would you swap on a 3-5-2 is mostly template? I mean, I don't have Madison on my free hit, right? At least he's on my bench, but he's not starting for me. So that's the situation. I've put Madison on my bench because I prefer gambling for Isak and a start there. That guy says he's ended up adding Kane in his team in triple pass defense. All right, good luck with that. I think that's pretty ballsy. Mohammed says, will Jesus start? I think so. I haven't heard any news that Jesus will not start. Can I do score predictions? How good was I with the score predictions last week, JP? I'm just curious. Jonathan says, would you start Matters over Solanke? I'd probably not, though. I'd probably actually start Solanke over Madison. If you didn't have Isak, who would you have? I'd actually probably go Solanke, ironically. Mohammed says Van Dijk or Robertson. I think I actually prefer Van Dijk. Thoughts on playing both Madison and Bowen in a 5-man midfield? Nothing wrong with it. I'm just not that high on Bowen. Anka says she's getting the Rebel itch. Kane versus Trippier, Solanke versus Zuma. Which of the two defenders would you bench? Ooh, that's a tough question. I'd probably bench Zuma. Yeah, I know there's some West Ham in the family, but I would probably bench Zuma first. Rashid says Solanke or Isak. I am locked on Isak, yeah, because I don't think we'll get any other updates on Isak, and I do think he's going to start. Ad says Billing and Jota or Gakpo and Solanke. I would go for Gakpo and Solanke 100%. What do you think of Son as a differential? I don't think he's a very good differential this week. I mean, he's always going to be a good differential, like with air quotes, but it's a very bad matchup. Like, it's Newcastle away from home, one of the worst fixtures possible. And for some reason, the reality is none of us have properly owned Son this season, even when he had great fixtures. And now you're telling me that he's playing Newcastle away from home, that you'd consider him as a differential. I think he'd probably be a better differential in most weeks other than this, like if I have to be brutally honest. So I don't really like Son as a pick. Am I going to say no to it? No, because obviously Son is in your mind. So I'm not going to push you against it, but this is probably one of the few weeks where I would say Son is not a great differential. Chill Gamer says Gabriel or White. Honestly, I'd flip a coin. I think Gabriel is probably the better option, but nothing wrong with White. Oya King, my G friend, how's it going? Any thoughts on Moreno and Guehi at the back? Totally okay with it. I'm comfortable with that. Kane up top, fair enough. So you've dropped Trippier so that you can justify, I guess, going for Kane. I feel like I'm doing too many gambles at this point. I do think it's too many gambles, mate, because as I said, I don't really love Guehi at the back because I feel like the ceiling's not even that high. So it's like, what do you like gambling the upside on? I think even Trippier could get better upside just because he can get an attacking haul, right? As far as Moreno, I actually do like him as a pick, so nothing wrong with Moreno, but I wouldn't go double Crystal Palace defense unless obviously your keeper is a completely different keeper that I'm sort of missing out here. Kane is similar to the thoughts on Son. Now, he's a better option than Son 100%, but is he actually a good option this week? I would say Kane might not be. Start Solanke or Jordan Ayew, 100% Solanke. Chill Gamer says Robertson, Matters, and Jesus, or Gabriel, Gakpo, and Tony. Ooh, that's a pretty close. I would actually go for Gabriel, Gakpo, and Tony, frankly. What do you think of Castagna, Iheanacho? I think Iheanacho is a huge gamble because for example, let's say if Iheanacho starts the game, there is a possibility that you could still see Vardy coming on at 65 minutes. Or like, for example, last week we saw, I think, Vardy 49-minute substitute, right? So Iheanacho can obviously play very, very, very good minutes in the sense that you're looking at the 60-65 range, but that's still quite low just because there's competition for the places in this Leicester team and you don't have like a permanent fixture coach. So I don't love Iheanacho this week. Castagna makes a little bit more sense for me there. I think 4th best in terms of clean sheet odds, or 5th, actually 5th. But he's got enough attacking upside for me to say Castagna's okay. I like Guehi too, but I feel like if you're going Guehi and Johnstone, I'm not sure if I really want to back the Crystal Palace defense that much. I feel like it was already tough for me to even stretch to someone like Johnstone. But yeah, I would just say that. No free at Martinelli or Saka captain. I mean, it's too good of a fixture for Salah. I know the last time Salah played Nottingham Forest, he had a big fat blank and Liverpool lost 1-0 to an Awoniyi goal. But I mean, yeah, it's at Anfield and look, Salah's looked incredible lately. Mayank says, help me choose one between Andreas Solanke and Eze. Honestly, I would say Solanke is the safest option, but if you want a bit of upside, I would say go Andreas. I mean, you've got a penalty taker there. I'd probably back the penalty takers in both instances, but Solanke, for me, I like him just a touch more because you've got the guarantee of Solanke playing 90 minutes, whereas with Andreas, sometimes he does become that sort of 72 minute, 75, or even 80 minute substitute, which is my concern there. Oh, you've got no Salah. Sorry about that. Yeah, honestly, look, I don't think I actually would. This is not a week where I would say Saka's clear ahead of Martinelli. I'd still probably favor Saka just because at the end of the day, Saka is a penalty taker. And I don't subscribe to, for example, the theory that you can't get penalties back to back. That on top of Saka's really, really good home numbers all season long, just probably lead me towards Saka just a little bit. But nothing wrong with Martinelli. I think they're very close this week. If you wanted to go Martinelli, I'm not going to say no to that. I feel like the issue with Eze is I kind of view Crystal Palace as potentially something like Arsenal light, right? Well, maybe I think Jesus is not, for example, Mateta or even Edouard are not comparable options to Jesus, but when you look at the team and who can actually do well in this Crystal Palace team, like Ayew could do well, Eze and Elise can do well as well, so it's really hard for me to say, okay, flat out, I know who's going to haul, and we know that Crystal Palace don't have the same sort of attacking goal scoring ceiling as a team compared to a team like Arsenal. So that already immediately concerns me with the Eze pick, and he's not even a penalty taker compared to those two other options. Thoughts on Odegaard versus Eze versus Saka? Interesting. And if I replace Kane, Solanke is who I'm tempted by, but Tony, I think Tony's a perfectly good option. Tony actually has really good market odds as well, and you'll see on many models that Tony features really well. People are projecting, for example, for Brentford to actually break the Aston Villa clean sheet this week, despite the beautiful run of form that Aston Villa have been. I think Aston Villa, if you look at their away numbers, particularly on expected goals conceded, have been really, really low compared to their home numbers, which have actually been really positive. So that's my concern. But I don't think Eze is terrible. Of course, I still think he's a great option, but you're just asking me for who I'd back. And honestly, there's a sliver of difference between how I rate certain players this week. A lot of the differentials are probably, in my mind, very close to each other. So that's my concern and why I would still go for penalty takers at times. You're so tempted to captain Maddison. I mean, I would not recommend it. You've got Liverpool and Arsenal who've got perfect fixtures, and you're going for a Maddison captain. I went for Maddison versus Bournemouth thinking that I was going to hit the jackpot, but what I got was a Maddison blank and potentially even Bournemouth benefiting from a Maddison assist against his own team. So yeah, I'm just not that high on Leicester as an overall team, and I think you have to sort of frame it in the context that, of course, Maddison's a great player, but how good is this Leicester team? How capable are they of breaking Wolves down? Wolves have been very consistent in terms of keeping the scoreline low, so my concern with Maddison is what's the upside there compared to two teams that are at the top when it comes to offensive numbers playing versus two terrible teams in Nottingham Forest and Southampton. Convince me for Gakpo. Why is he in every draft ahead of players like Robertson or Mid? I don't think he's in every draft ahead of players like Robertson. I've seen a lot of people go for Robertson drafts. As far as Son, I mean, let's dismiss Son this week, right? Because he's versus Newcastle away from home. Newcastle's away numbers have been elite. This is probably the worst week possible for Son. So even when we compare fixtures against each other, like Gakpo has a premium fixture compared to Son. As far as Maddison, look, I've sort of made the case in terms of how poor Leicester are as a team. With Gakpo, it's I can only convince you if you trust that Gakpo will start. If you don't think Gakpo will start, then obviously he's not a good punt. But if you think Gakpo will start and he's going to play 75 minutes versus Nottingham Forest, then he should be considered a good option for you because he's got good underlying numbers, both in terms of expected goals and expected assists. He's been consistent this year in terms of actually meeting those expected numbers as well. So he's already scored quite a few, assisted quite a few this season against the numbers. So he's not like someone like Darwin, where Darwin, I think, has something like 11 XG, but then actually has only scored 9 goals. So you can also see, even with the chances, like from the eye test, that Darwin has been really poor at finishing. Gakpo is not in that scenario. Now, he doesn't have the same elite attacking positioning like someone like Gakpo, like Darwin, for example, but you'd hope that obviously versus Nottingham Forest, some of the chances that United got that they weren't clinical with, that Gakpo could take them, and he has shown to be a clinical finisher in the past, especially with the numbers in the Eredivisie, and just simply what he's done so far in the Premier League this season. If you think he starts, I think he's a better option than both Maddison and Son. saving free hit for 34, already with Salah and Trent for -4. I think that's fine. Should you do Madison to Saka / Martinelli or Holland out to try fund McAllister to Arsenal players? Ooh, that's an interesting one. So I'm not actually very. It depends on actually if you have Kane. If you can go from Kane to Holland next week, Perrin, I think that actually makes sense. But I think if you can't go to Holland without going for a -4 next week, then I would not recommend going for Arsenal players. However, this is a premium week for Arsenal players. The matchup itself is probably worth at least one Arsenal transfer. So I'm not opposed to the idea that you're going to defund, let's say, McAllister from your team to go for those Arsenal players. But as I said, it goes back down to on Gameweek 33. Do you have the option to go to Holland single transfer from, let's say, someone like Kane? And if you don't, then I'd probably step away from that move. Geronimo says Trent and Salah are the runaway leaders for FPL from Liverpool. Trent is so much better than 0.7 million, better than Robbo. 100%. Trent is so much better of an option than Robbo. And that's why I was willing to go and spend all my money. Like I'm literally on my regular FPL team is on 0.0 in the bank because I 100% wanted to squeeze it for Trent. Mayak says, sorry for asking too many questions. No, totally fine. What do you think of Jesus instead of an Arsenal defender? And would you start? Yeah, I would start Moreno. I think Moreno's underlying data has been really good. He's on 0.22 expected assists per season. That actually puts him on course with many other top fullbacks in the league. Let's say even Robertson, for example, who actually has had really consistent attacking numbers throughout his entire career. Robertson is pretty much consistently a 0.22 expected assist average within the Premier League. So he's been an elite defender, and you can tell for that reason that Moreno has really good numbers. I believe Castagna has 0.11 expected assists. Now, Moreno has only played 958 minutes this season, I think. So keep that in mind in terms of how small or how large the sample size is in your head. But I think Moreno is a lovely option for that reason. And the clean sheet odds, like the percentages, aren't that too far apart. Brentford slightly lower. Aston Villa slightly lower, but Leicester a touch higher. But as I said, there's enough upside for Moreno to be better than someone like Castagna for me. So I would say I would go for Moreno. As far as Jesus, look, it comes down to whether you believe Jesus will play something like 80 minutes of football, which based on Arteta's comments, I'd probably suggest that it's worth thinking a bit cautiously with Jesus. So that's my concern there with Jesus. I'm just going to have a look at Twitter now, just to have a look and see if we have any last minute leaks. Doesn't actually seem to be any. I don't think there's going to be any leaks. We'll have to see team news and ticks, of course. Just quickly checking. Yeah. Arsenal actually have been a team notoriously where it's very hard to get leaks from, but the last person to get a juicy little Arsenal leak was actually Andy when he actually found out that Saka was going to be sick. So doesn't seem like there's any sort of potential leaking. So I think we could probably live on the safe side from that aspect. Going back to the questions, though, so Francis says Johnstone, Isak, or Martinez and Slang. They're very close as options. I probably would still back Johnstone and Isak. But as I've been saying, look, Isak is a gamble because you know that Wilson could even start in some games. But I can't see why Isak would be benched. He's had at least a week to rest, so it would make sense for him to play. In terms of Isak over Solanke, I've mentioned that West Ham have been third, and this is a positive number, right? Like third as in one of the best teams in defending. They have the third best away expected goals conceded in the league. Now, they've actually conceded quite a bit more than some other teams. So when you actually look at actual goals conceded, of course, West Ham drop a little bit. But West Ham have been very consistent at defending away from home. And I just think that this is quite a poor fixture for Solanke for that reason. On top of that, I do believe Isak is going to start, so I'm taking that gamble. And because I think Isak will play at least 75 minutes of football, I'm quite tempted to attack what has been a declining Spurs team defensively. And their away numbers are actually really poor as well, Spurs, particularly in away goals conceded. So when you compare it to a team like West Ham as well, different circumstances there. Not to mention that, of course, Newcastle's a much better attack. So are you a bit disappointed with Estupinian? Well, I'm not because I have Steele in my team. So I have not actually owned Estupinian in my team this season. You like White as an Arsenal defender? I think so. If you're going for an Arsenal defender in your draft, I generally think you could flip a coin between Gabriel and White, and they're probably two great options. What fixture will be the highest scoring this week? I actually think it's Liverpool versus Nottingham Forest. I mean, I know Leeds have given in like, what, 5-6 goals the last 2 weeks, but ultimately, without Mitrovic being there, I feel like Fulham, that sets a little bit of a cap in terms of how clinical the finishing is from Fulham. So that's my concern there. Unless, of course, you have someone like Manor Solomon who just scores every sort of goal outside the box. Dr. Limbo says, hi, Fran. I could only fill 9 players after -4 Kane to Salah free at necessary. I mean, if you're going to take that, So I would say the logic of going for a -8 isn't bad, because technically any hits at this point is just to remove a blanker, right? So that should hopefully be a -2 maximum. So if you really, really wanted to go for free on Gameweek 34, which it seems like you are, then I would just take another hit and maybe try to find another way to get someone like Trent in your team or something like that. Pope or Raya for this game week. I think if you own Trippier in your team, I'd probably want to hedge a little bit and just go for Raya. So like to diversify the sort of the clean sheet. FPL Animate, nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Glad to join your stream, man. Got Trippier like everyone else, but because you think of the clean sheet points or hope he can 100%, it's a mix of both, right? Because a lot of defenders outside of Liverpool and Arsenal defenders have really bad clean sheets odds this week, so you have to look at the attacking upside for the third defender always. So because Trippier still has really good attacking numbers, and I don't think Tottenham, for example, are particularly good at actually preventing corners. So, for example, if you listen to the press conference of Unai Emery last week when they were playing, Aston Villa were playing Newcastle at home, one of the things that was interesting was that he was mentioning how one of the game plans was to actually stop corners. Whereas if you look at Spurs, I don't think they're particularly good at stopping corners. They're a very good corner-taking team. They have really good corner takers, but in terms of preventing corners, I think Trippier will get some chances there. They're still quite capable of giving fouls in key areas where Trippier can benefit. So I do think that Trippier will be a good option this week for the simple purpose of the attacking upside, and he actually still ultimately has better clean sheet odds than a Brentford defense than a Leicester defense. You're playing Iverson, fingers crossed. Good luck with that. Is there any sort of gut reason why you've gone against Wolves? Like you don't really back Wolves for some reason? Should quickly go back on Twitter, see if there's any last minute news in terms of Arsenal. A lot of people seem to be going for Son, so that's quite interesting. A lot of people seem to be going for Son. That's pretty spicy, I'm not gonna lie. But as I said, I just don't like the fixture. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's because we actually love Son so much as a player, and like you remember the highs of Son. But it's like it's still Newcastle away, or am I wrong? Are you expecting? No, I'm not expecting Isak to play 90 minutes. I'm expecting him to play 75 minutes. You're kind of hesitant about his minutes with Wilson, Murphy, and even Almiron returning. No doubt that Spurs defenses want to target, though. Just a clean sheet odds from bookies. You don't fancy Wolves despite their scoring record of late. Fair enough. That's fine. And thank you so much, Mayak, for suggesting people like the stream. Prediction for Newcastle Spurs. Honestly, I think it could be something like 2-0 Newcastle. But Spurs have been very, very capable in scoring each game, and if Son scores, then I'm just gonna cry a little bit. But yeah. Why are people going for both Son and Trippier in their draws is probably my question. I feel like if you've gone... Okay, this is an interesting question, actually. Who's actually gone for both Kane and Trippier or Son and Trippier in their draft? I'd love to know that, because I feel like free hit's the best time where you just want to predict someone to do well. Right, like a certain result to happen. Now, unless, of course, Trippier scores a free kick and Spurs also score, then, of course, that's a good justification. But the chances of that happening are quite low, if we're being honest. That guy, so are you going Kane in your draft 100% then? I'd love to see it, to be honest. Kane has actually one of the lowest goal-scoring odds this week. So I think this is a good week if you'd like to bet on that sort of belief, potentially. Vishal says, John Stone, Trent, White, Guehi... Salah, Gakpo, Marte, Olise, Watkins, Lanky. I love the team. I'm not so high on Olise, but I think the team's pretty faultless outside of Olise. I think I might actually still prefer Eze over Olise ultimately. But Mayak says, who do I think the highest point scoring players will be this week? I mean, I've got to say Salah. I've got to say Jesus. I've got to say Saka, Martinelli. But okay, let's not be so boring in terms of Liverpool and Arsenal options. I'm trying to think here. Hmm. I think there's a genuine punt to say Isak will do well this week in terms of the ceiling, because Spurs have been pretty diabolical as of late. Hmm. I think Trent captaincy is not crazy to me as well, genuinely. Um, Tough. I think that's it really, because I like Watkins, I like Tony, I like Solanke, but it's hard to pick between whether they're actually high ceiling or not. I do see, for example, Aston Villa Brentford being a little bit of a both teams to score game. Just trying to think. I guess Andreas has a pretty high ceiling this week as well. You know, if things all fall into place for Fulham. But that's like I guess you can say that I don't have any conviction with that because Andreas doesn't even sit in my team. I don't like Madison that much. But he's still on my draft, ironically. Yeah, those are the kind of players that I'm seeing that will do well, unfortunately. And that's sort of why our free hit templates have so much Liverpool, so much Arsenal. Yeah, and then maybe one or two gambles in the midfield or forward positions. Like a lot of people probably have Madison or Eze over me. Some people have gone for Son. But I'm not. I still feel like most of our points will come from Liverpool and Arsenal, and I feel like it would be disingenuous for me to just say that a lot of players will hold hard. Score predictions for Arsenal, Southampton, Leicester, Wolves. I think Leicester Wolves could probably be. I think Wolves could win that game, probably like 2-1. As far as Arsenal, Southampton, probably going to be 3-0 Arsenal. Geronimo says Andres is a great shout. Olise is interesting, right? Because he's much more of a creative player. So if you put Olise in your team, you're actually expecting him to get assists as opposed to goals, unless he, of course, scores another beautiful finesse goal, like from a free kick. That guy will remember, of course, as he's a United fan. But Junior Gaming says, hi, Fran. -8, Kane to Solanke or Odegaard to Salah, no free hit. Okay, if you press me like this, I think Odegaard to Salah, no free hit is actually a really good transfer. Yeah. Nuclear Atoms, -8 to get rid of Rashford, Kane, Mark. Why are you going out of Rashford, though? Oh, you're free out on 34. Fine. The thing is, though, I like Salah, but I feel like Solanke and Ayew is a bit tough. I would limit to a -4. Like, if I can do 2 transfers to go Kane to Salah, it would make more sense. I wouldn't go too punty beyond that, right? Because I feel like Ayew is already too much of a punt, particularly for a hit. I know you're going for 3 on 34, so justifiable, I guess, to drop Rashford and Kane as well. So yeah, I'm happy with you to do that. But keep in mind, of course, when you go for Salah, like that actually sets your team up really well for 34. So that's one of my concerns too. I think Harrison is a good shout as well as Andreas. I mean, look, Leeds. I think Fulham have been like, if you look at the defensive numbers, like Fulham actually is like a bottom 2 defense. So whilst this Leeds team have been conceding goals like left and right, there's no reason to suggest that Fulham aren't fully capable of conceding as well. Like I think it's more than likely going to be the case that both teams score that game. They've been both shocking defenses, and Fulham have vastly outperformed their expected goals conceded. So there's a bit of a positive there. But recently, you've actually seen Fulham hemorrhage a lot in defense, right? So it kind of feels like their attacking and defensive numbers are averaging out, and part of the attacking number dropping off is due to Mitrovic as well. I mean, they're their most clinical striker as well, outside of when he takes penalties. But yeah, that's kind of my position on that. Ahoy, hey. Jota or Gakpo? I'd say Gakpo, because I still prefer forwards over midfielders this week. You've switched Matters to first sub over Andreas. He won't get subbed. Andreas could. Not that it matters much. Yeah, that's fair enough, Thomas. I highly doubt that we have to be calling upon our bench this week if we're free hitting. I feel like I've just gone with some vibes picks on my bench because I'm not expecting them to play. But of course, look, now that I have Gakpo and Isak in my team, that could be could come back to bite me, but we'll see. Let's see. Johnson, Moreno, Robertson, White, Salah, Martinelli, Madison, Willian. Ooh, okay. So you've gone for a lot of punts in the midfield. Interesting. Just curious though. Wait, sorry. Do you have 3 Arsenal in your team? Because you say you've got White, you say you've got Martinelli, but do you only have 2 Arsenal? Riddle me this. I'm a bit confused. Why not triple Arsenal? Or do you have Jesus? Journal says like it, Ayew. I think Watkins is much better than Ayew for sure. Captain Saka, Martinelli, Trent, or Watkins. I'd probably captain Saka. I would actually captain Trent. Sorry, Robbie. I'd captain Trent, 100%. Siab says, if you were to pick one of those three, would it be Isak, Tony, or Jesus? I mean, I would pick Jesus 100% still. Like, I own, ironically, Tony and Isak. But if you ask me, like, who's the best option, like, it's still Jesus. But the reason why I've dropped Jesus is because I think the other Arsenal options are better. I mean, not better, sorry, but just as good. Let's just say that. Just as good. Is anyone actually not going for a Salah captaincy who owns Salah? Just curious, actually. I'll probably drop a poll in the chat just to get a flavor for the captaincies that we have this week. I think I'll go for captaincy game week 32. I think Salah is definitely an option. You've got Trent as well. And I think I'll probably squeeze two options because I think I'll say Saka and Martinelli. I guess Jesus could be an option too, but I'm not sure if people actually seem to think that Jesus won't play that many minutes, so therefore it doesn't seem like they're too inclined to captaining Jesus. I'm going for a Salah captaincy, but yeah. Just gonna quickly check Twitter as well, just to hope that there's no crazy last minute news when it comes to Arsenal and Liverpool and things like that. Is anyone actually going for Odegaard over Martinelli as well? Just curious. So we've got 92% Salah, then Trent. No one's even considering Arsenal. And I think that's totally fair. Because when you watch Trent and you look at the ceiling that he could get this week with a clean sheet. I mean, last week, for example, without a silly Konate mistake, that was probably going to be Trent outscoring Salah, right? Trent had 2 assists. He was going to get 2 bonus points. So that would have dropped Salah to 1 bonus point. I know this is a lot of if and conjecture here, but yeah, I mean, that was set up to be a fantastic Trent game because I think ultimately you're looking at 14 points for Trent versus what would have been like 11 for Salah. So Trent's more than capable of reproducing something like that. He's also capable of even scoring goals. So we've been mostly looking at him as a creative asset, and that's totally fine because that's what Trent primarily does. But he's also on free kicks. He could take direct free kicks. Now, one of the free kicks he actually did last week was actually a set-piece play where he passed it to Van Dijk over the top, who then passed it to Salah, who scored offside. I think Van Dijk was offside, actually. But of course, like Trent's a massive creator, so great captaincy option this week as well. Why Gabriel over White? I mean, I'm just sort of betting on a set-piece goal, really. Forest have the worst away scoring record in the league by a long way. Yeah, I mean, that's an even larger positive to go and suggest that Trent's a good captaincy option too. Can you please pick rank among Gakpo, Madison, Bone, Isak, Solanke? I would say Gakpo 1, Isak 2, I would say level with Solanke, and then I would say Madison, then I would say Bowen. Just follow your Twitter page. Don't know why you didn't. Oh, thank you very much, Paolo. Also, if you guys could like and subscribe, that'd be ideal. You already have Trent. Nuclear Adam says he's already got Trent, and with Salah and Solanke, it sets you up well for 34. I mean, I think 37 free hit is probably the one you'd be targeting, right? If you're not going for 34. That's why I was trying to say that if you like those hits for this week, which I'm actually not opposed to, I actually really do like those hits as well. Then yeah, why not think about free hitting on 37? That could be a good opportunity to sort of, if you let's say force your transfers towards building it for up to 36 and even including 38, then you just need to sort of avoid 37 from your thinking. So like delete 37 from your fixture list, have a look at who the best players are in your mind, excluding 37, and then make transfers towards that end. Because it seems like, as I said, if you go for Salah and Trent this week, you are actually setting yourself up in a very elite way for 34. Okay, so I've just seen that guy's draft. Pretty spicy, not gonna lie. He's going for Kane, no Trippier, so he's actually sort of backing his judgment call on Kane getting a massive haul in Newcastle, which no one has actually gotten this season. Fun fact, I think no forward has actually gotten 6 to 8, more than 8 points versus Newcastle this season. But maybe I'm wrong, and someone can actually let me know if that's the case. You'll limit to Solanke and Salah for -4. I think that makes sense. Why Isak or Jesus? What do you mean? Why Isak and no Jesus? Is that kind of what you're asking for, Umar? FPL Yeti says, help me to choose two between Bowen, Madison, Andreas, Eze, Solanke, and Tony. I would go for Tony and Solanke, to be honest. I think I quite like Andreas as a close third. But I find those midfielders are very, very similar. Like Madison, Andreas, Eze. I think there's not too much between them. And then I think Bowen is actually probably the worst option there. Riddles me this, says he's got 2 Arsenal, taking 3 punts in the midfield. Ken Jordan, I would go for 3 Arsenal, please. Like, honestly, if you're free hitting, I would go for 3 Arsenal. Genuinely. I can't in good faith suggest going double Arsenal. Why Gabriel triple up instead of Jesus? So I think that Gabriel and Jesus is similar in terms of the ceiling. I'm sort of expecting Jesus to play less minutes than usual, just so that he can continue to be rested in the same way that he has, for example, in the West Ham match. And my concern, or not really concern, but I think Gabriel has plenty of good chances of getting a clean sheet versus Southampton. They've been a terrible team as of late. So that's my thoughts there. And when it comes to the defense, right, because you always have to compare Jesus plus a defender versus Gabriel plus a forward. I like the forward options more as alternatives to Jesus than I like alternatives to Gabriel, because I'm not so tempted on double Liverpool defense. I don't really like Robertson this week. So my thoughts are, why not go for someone like Gabriel, who can plug a hole in my team that I would think would be quite large if I went for Moreno. Because I think Moreno, unfortunately, even though I really like him as a player, is still pales in comparison to Gabriel as an asset compared to, let's say, an Isak versus a Jesus. Because Isak, Jesus, I feel like they're both gambles in a sense this week with minutes. So why not just go for like Isak instead, who's also on penalties if let's say Wilson doesn't start, and then the same sort of situation with Watkins and Tony, who are going to play hopefully 90 minutes, be on penalties as well, and like it's not like I'm picking a result against each other as well. Just because I'm picking both forwards in the Brentford Aston Villa game doesn't mean I have to sort of look at a specific result. This allows for both teams to score. Whereas obviously for some people who've gone for Kane and Trippier, that becomes like you're almost like limiting the ceiling of your draft, I guess. Clean sheets seem rare. Wouldn't it be better to get an attacking defender? So you mean like White? I mean, why would Gabriel not be an attacking defender? I guess that would be my question to you. You looked at a quick computer projection, FPL review free. Yeah, I mean, Salah is going to be the best captaincy option 100%, and that's why the poll suggests that as well. But Trent's probably your second best one. Eze or Elise? I'd probably go Eze. Almiron, I think Almiron's too much of a risk because you could still see someone start ahead of Almiron. It might be the case, especially since he's been recovering from his injury, that you won't see Almiron actually start this game. And even if he was to start this game, you could see a limit, right, in the minutes. Because remember when Isak actually started games and he was starting to build some fitness, he would get subbed off at 60 minutes, right? So I feel like because Almiron has only recently come back, the chances that he's going to play 60 minutes and more than 60 minutes is going to be 90. I know you're not targeting me, Ben, by the way. I'm just also answering proverbially what my justification is for going for Gabriel. Because as I've been saying to people in chat, like I would go with Gabriel or White. So White obviously is a little bit more interesting because he's making a lot of these runs on the back post. So that obviously suggests that he's going to be really involved in the final third, which, you know, not many fullbacks are, because it's not very often that you dominate completely, where players like Moreno and players like Ben White actually get inside the box and actually create. Whereas obviously last week with Moreno versus Newcastle, when he was actually dribbling through Trippier many times, and also Ben White, who actually found a back post assist to Jesus on the far post, like that suggests, of course, that these are fullbacks, particularly with dominant teams, who are capable of finding themselves in advanced positions. But even when we go back to it, right, like Gabriel, like what are his chances of scoring? It's still direct set pieces, and Southampton have pretty bad numbers when it comes to conceding corners and things like that. And Gabriel still has really good XG for a defender. So yeah, I think anytime you're looking at a match where you're saying why go for Gabriel, I know it doesn't sound sexy to go for like a header, but Gabriel actually has really good numbers when it comes to how consistently he's able to find chances to score each match, specifically as well because Arsenal are very good at actually getting corners. Kotaro, nice to meet you as well. Nice to see you on the live stream. Pablo says you're going Moreno, the attacking return is possible, 100%. And I think the only reason why I would go Moreno is because of the attacking return. Like, he genuinely has really good expected assist numbers compared to other top fullbacks in the league. What's your feeling with Maddison against Wolves? He seems hungry for goals. I mean, he seems hungry for goals, but I mean, when was the last time he scored a goal? because I was pretty hungry for a Madison goal in my team when I brought him on Gameweek 29, and I'm still waiting. The clock is still ticking, and Madison still hasn't scored a goal. And he didn't get to score versus Man City B either. FPL Yeti says, you reached 96 subs today and was helping to hear your best tips for a small FPL channel. Yeah, I would say that the only tip I have for if you're making FPL channels is to stay consistent. Like, if you don't look at necessarily the subs and you just look at how consistent you are with putting out videos, and you look at your videos every week and you reflect on them and you try to make small little adjustments to make to improve them, then that's the best way forwards with your channel. Jonas says he likes White's assist potential 100%. He's also got a couple of goals lately. Arsenal fan. Think Gabriel could get himself sent off. Do you actually think so? I think Gabriel, like the last time, I think he's actually been very consistent post World Cup. Gabriel, like I think Saliba's actually made more mistakes in my mind than Gabriel post World Cup. But of course, I mean Gabriel's made some mistakes this season, but I don't really see him as someone who could lose his head and get a red card. I know in the past that has, but I feel like that's something he has been slowly working on. That might be judgmental, of course. Now, Gabriel could lose his head, and he has gotten reds before. But I feel like some of his reds don't even necessarily come from like an angry outburst, right? Because I remember last season when he got a red card versus Man City, it was just because he was the last man, wasn't it? So that was interesting. I hope you have a lovely game week as well, Yeti, and take care. But sorry, going back to the point on Gabriel versus White. I mean, Gabriel, look, he still averages like an XG of 0. Like I think close to 0.2 or like 0.16 at least for a defender. Like those are ludicrous numbers really for a center back. That's probably better than any other center back in the league when it comes to set piece chances. So the fact that Arsenal have the creators to actually give like Gabriel a goal scoring opportunity consistently just suggests that he's just a good option. Of course, goals better than assists always, but yeah, White I believe actually has the same expected goal involvement per 90 as Gabriel. Anchor, you've done it. You got Grealish to Gakpo. Pretty devilish of you, thinking that Grealish will play Arsenal next week. Yeah, I guess it's meh. But I'm worried, of course, for you with Gakpo if he gets rested and rotated. But I hope he doesn't. Of course, on 33. Kutara says he still has Wildcard, but no free hit. Is it worth to use it now? I like the sort of general trajectory of free hitting now and then Wildcarding on 33 and 34 because ultimately you can dead end this week. Arsenal, you probably don't really want them going forwards when it comes to how many doubles we have. Like, for example, you want triple Arsenal this week, right? 100%. But do you want triple Arsenal versus Man City? Probably not. Do you want triple Arsenal versus Chelsea for one game week when everyone's playing a double game week? Also probably not. So that's why I like the idea of just going for the free hit now and then just wildcarding, because your wildcard will 100% still set you up for the rest of the season. Whatever you do, right? Because you're just going to plan for those fixtures in mind. But why not target this week where it makes a lot of sense to go, even for example, for a punt, like a Liverpool midfielder. You probably wouldn't want to go for a Liverpool midfielder if you were just going for natural transfers and you were wildcarding at a different time or free hitting at a different time. However, this is a good opportunity to probably bet on something like a Gakpo start or a Jota start. So that's kind of my opinion on free hitting this week. I quite like it. It obviously depends on what your team looks like now. If you already have triple Arsenal, then it's a different circumstance. But for me, I literally have 0 Arsenal players in my team, so free hitting is perfect. And if I had a wild card, that would be even better. I would have even more conviction with it. But as I said, I do think this is a good week to free hit. Particularly, as you can see, a lot of people in chat are still asking questions like, should they take a -4? Should they take a -8? Should they take a -12? Those are the kind of questions you want to think about when you're free hitting this week. You have the opportunity to sidestep those hits. And a wild card should also help you sidestep future hits as well in other double game weeks. Yeah, interesting that you obviously have Saka Martinelli. I would probably go back to the question and say, do you have the right Liverpool players for this week? Simar says, would you choose... Well, thank you as well for the compliment. Would you choose Willian as a punt? Also, do you feel good about doubling on Liverpool? I don't love Willian as a punt because I feel like he always is that sort of 75-minute... Oh my god, have we gone to the... Oh, sorry. For some reason, I just panicked and thought we actually had the deadline 3 minutes ago, but we still got 27 minutes left. I do like the idea of... I do like Willian in isolation as a punt, but I feel like because there are so many other midfielders in those territories, with someone like Andreas as well on penalties, I just don't like it that much. Like, I like Willian maybe on bench, but, you know, we have enough good players for me to suggest that Willian's probably not one of the best players to go for. God, that was a bit of panic there. I don't know why. That was the deadline. But also my team's locked in, right? So... not that concerned overall. Apparently, Granit Xhaka might not be in the lineup. A little confused on that. So we're closing 27 minutes. Where if we're going to get some Arsenal leaks, we're going to get them soon. Are you guys like, for example, let's say if Jesus gets dropped, is that going to change your free hits? For me, obviously, it probably doesn't seem like that would be the case, but I can't see any Arsenal leaks right now. Yeah. God, I don't know. I got so scared, really. I don't know why I thought I missed the deadline. Tony to Jesus. Yeah, that makes sense. As we come closer to the deadline, the panic button sets in and all the plans go out the window. I mean, I've been set on this plan for 2 or 3 days now. I'm quite happy with it. Jacobs, you're first in your mini league, and the person below you has Kane, Tony, and Jesus. Does it make sense to copy him in those players and then play the best team around those players? I would say no, right? Because I think the way you actually got to first in your mini league was by getting as much points as possible. I wouldn't suddenly play now to get less points, right? Because I think Kane is not a great striker this week. Now, that guy in the chat might actually disagree, but because he has Kane in his team, but I don't really like Kane for this week particularly. I think Jesus is perfectly good. Like, if you really wanted to hedge against that, that's fine. Tony as well. But I'd probably look for another option over Kane. I think, for example, Watkins, I would actually prefer over Kane this week. So that would probably be my front three if you wanted to go Jesus. Thoughts on Solanke over Tony? I like Tony over Solanke. I think Tony still has better underlying numbers than Solanke, so I just like Tony for that reason. And I don't think Aston Villa have, as I said, Aston Villa have some pretty terrible numbers when it comes to their away expected goals conceded, so I can't see a reason why Aston Villa wouldn't concede in this match. And for example, the market odds have already adjusted to that as well. You miscounted. You don't have a full 11. Should I take another hit to get rid of Shaw for White or March for IU? I mean, once again, it goes back to 34, right? Nuclear Atoms. Like, if you're now building for a 3 at 37, I think March for a defender makes sense because I guess you could... it's tough, actually. Sorry. I'm trying to think. I guess they're both bad for your 34 team. But then in terms of 37, I guess you could also dodge... Because then March will have a double in 36, right? So you probably actually want to keep March in your team. Maybe you could drop Shaw for White. That could be an okay transfer. Because the way I see it as well is Shaw actually has a pretty bad fixture next week versus Tottenham. So if you were going to 3-hit, even if you were going 34 or 37, then you still probably are looking for a better starting 11 for next week. So I think that if you can find a midfielder that also has a good matchup on 33, at the bare minimum, and you keep March as well in your team. Sorry, not midfielder, but defender, of course, which White obviously is. Then keeping March for your team makes sense because I like keeping March for the 36 double game week, right? Because that's going to happen 1 week before Shaw's on 37. Kotaro says Isak to Jota. I mean, it depends, right? So who are you dropping in terms of, like, who was your third Liverpool option previous to going for Jota in your team? So I would need to kind of know the pairing. JT says Isak or Tony. I like Tony more. Thoughts on Perisic? His numbers recently look decent. I mean, I like Perisic, but I can't see Spurs going away without a clean sheet. So I wouldn't go for Perisic. Paulo says, good luck for the weekend. Take care as well. Hope you have a lovely weekend. Linford says, Gakpo and Moreno or Robbo and Tony. I like Gakpo and Moreno more. I'm not too fond of Robbo. I think Moreno has good attacking upside as well. Actually equivalent to Robbo if you look at the underlying numbers. And then I think Gakpo is probably just a touch better than Tony. But Bournemouth as a team have a bigger XG than Man City now. What do you mean by bigger XG than Man City now? Sorry. Are you talking about like small sample size in terms of Solanke like last few games? Yeah, I agree with Geronimus 100% in terms of we should focus on making good choices. Like, basically, if you have a mental model in your head that X player is going to do better in terms of points than another player, I always think you should go with the higher points player in your head. You should never have a defensive approach to FPL because that's what leads to like poorer results overall as you go through the rest of the season. And there's actually a lot of game weeks left, so even if you're first in your league, you're not going to your season won't end this week. So if you were really ending your season this week, then it makes sense to obviously copy second place. But because there's still multiple weeks left, I wouldn't take that sort of defensively minded approach. Jason says, "Hey Fran, put me or Botman on the bench." I'd probably put me on the bench because actually, like Newcastle better clean sheet odds. Going for Jota as my third Liverpool player. Who do I pick for the midfield spot? I mean, you've got Madison as an option, you've got Eze as an option, you've got Andreas as an option. Those are probably my three best picks that are replacements to, you know, a midfield that is obviously an Arsenal player. Recently, their XG is bigger than Man City. I mean, are you sort of like, what's the sample size here, Nuclear? Because I kind of need to know, because I don't think that that's actually true. Katara says, "Oh man, I'm dizzy. Panic now because there's no more free hit, but only wildcard." Oh, you're wildcarding. Oh, let me actually think about... That's a good question. Let me think about what I would wildcard into this week. I guess you have no free hits left, right? So you have to be thinking for a wildcard for the rest of the season. I mean, to be honest, I would still go triple Liverpool, but I'm not sure if I would go Robertson. Like, I might even consider Allison crazily, or even Konate as a bit of a punt there. But it's tough to suggest that Konate will start every single game for the rest of the season, so that's one of my concerns. Give me a sec. I'm trying to think in my head. I think I'd definitely go Trent Salah. I'd probably squeeze in one Arsenal midfielder that can simply just be another player that gets rotated next week or even transferred out. Nothing wrong really with keeping an Arsenal player, but let me just think. Like, you'd have to have some bench players in terms of like Haaland, for example. I'd probably just go for Haaland on a wild card. I'd probably go for Solanke as well. I think Isak makes sense too because you've got that Newcastle double on 36. McAllister or Mitoma. I think Mitoma is probably the option I'd go for. Or March, maybe. March could be better. March could probably save you some budget as well. I'd strongly have to consider between going Gakpo or Robertson. Like, you have to make that decision in your head as well if you're going triple Liverpool. But I would go Trippier, probably Schär as well. Like, just get the triple Newcastle defense to cover 36. I'd probably go for Jason Steele to cover Brighton defense, and he's very cheap. So I'd probably go for Johnstone and Steele because you only really need a goalkeeper for this week, and presumably like Steele keeps his spot in the team, and Steele makes sense. So I would do that and have Salah probably something, as I said, just go for Saka, Rashford, McAllister, those sorts of players, and that's your kind of wildcard template for me in my head. All right, going back to the questions though. Twitter, please. Yeah, I'll have a look at Twitter DMs in a sec. What to improve for next doubles? Have you actually messaged me already? Yeah. I don't know if you actually messaged me or am I missing a message? All right, going back to YouTube chat, FPL Yeti says, as the deadline comes closer, you're increasingly worried about Jesus getting bored. Getting bored? What do you mean? Do you mean getting benched or getting bored? What do you think is that? I just love the idea of Jesus getting bored playing Southampton because they're such a terrible team. Umar says, I still can't believe I went Iheanacho. Oh god, that's a terrible. That's unfortunate. But I would also say in the future, right? What's the learning point there? Iheanacho is always a minutes gamble. So when you're thinking about FPL, like, try to think long term as well. You always want to back the player who's going to consistently get 90 minutes over someone who plays like 60, 65, even 30 minutes at times. Because Iheanacho is competing with two players, but Watkins is really just competing with one, and the option's poor. As far as Kane being a good option for yet, I would say no. I don't love Kane this week. I think this is one of his worst matchups. It's not something that I'm super fond of. If you guys could also like the stream, that'd be highly appreciated. R&B for music would be triple Newcastle, Salah, and Trent. Are we talking wildcard here? The guys at FPL Wire showed those samples, so that was... I mean, I haven't watched the FPL Wire episode for this week, so I don't really know what the sample size is, Nuclear Atoms. But obviously, like when you're looking at Bournemouth, I mean, even in the previous match versus Spurs, their XG was something like 1. They scored 3 goals from an XG of 1. Like they clearly overperformed. And then it comes down to, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, are we including blanks? Are we including things like that as well for City? Because I think even in your head, like you probably wouldn't believe that Bournemouth are a better attacking team than City. So you need to look at sample sizes and be very clear what that means for your players. And the reason why we look at large sample size is because things average out. Kotaro, isn't Steele already? Steele was actually sick last week, Kotaro. So there's a pretty high chance that Steele is perfectly fine because Steele was actually sick and he was not ready to play. But I think that Steele will come back to start for the team. Yeah, Jesus could be. I don't think Jesus could be benched, but I think Jesus could only play 70, 65 minutes maybe. There could be an opportunity for him to get to be put on the bench eventually, quite early. Jesus replacements if you already have Watkins and Tony. I like Isak or Solanke. Those are your 2 options I would say in my mind. Who'd I go for? I'd go for Madison, honestly, over Andreas, just for vibes. But if you're really starting, I think Andreas is a decent punt. I'd probably actually go with Andreas, actually, if I had to start someone. I just have Madison on my bench for vibes. And to make me feel a little bit better about spending my budget on the free hit. Who'd I go for this week? Sorry, I've already answered that. Samar says, thanks. Kotara says, so bench Haaland with my... Yeah, of course. If you're going for a wild card, just keep Haaland on your bench. Yeah, I would say, yeah, better than... Yes, because you have to think that, okay, your wild card is going to make you weaker than some of the free hitters this week, but the whole point is that you will have a stronger team, for example, for Gameweek 33, than everyone else who's free hitting now, presumably, because you have that additional transfer booked in. So, yeah, as I said, I think if you go for Haaland, it makes sense. I don't want to recommend a draft for you where you're forced to spend a transfer on Haaland, so it makes sense, in my mind, to go for players that you will like, right, going towards the end of the season. Yeah, exactly what Geronimo says in terms of not booking a transfer. Simar says, who do I prefer doubling up on? Liverpool defense, Crystal Palace defense, or Newcastle defense? Like in a perfect world, it would be Liverpool defense, but because you have the alternative of going for Liverpool attackers, I would actually say I'd probably back Crystal Palace defense more than Newcastle defense. Because the reason why I've gone for Trippier is the attacking upside, which not many other people do have. So that's kind of the sad reality. Nuclear Atom says Trippier, Shard, Trent, so you can easily bench White in 34. So White seems like the best option for a -8 to get. Yeah, I think that makes sense, Nuclear Atoms. It was the same kind of point that I made, where even if you look all the way towards 36 on your team, you can call upon March, right, without having to force another transfer into a Brighton player. JT says double Newcastle defense or Trippier and 1 Palace defender. I like the second option. Hoon says Madison or Bowen. I think Madison's better. V21, VVD, Virgil van Dijk for Estupinian or Konate for Perraud. I would go for... Look, honestly, I would go... I think Konate is a gamble with minutes, and you want to make sure that these Liverpool players start every game. I know Konate's looked fabulous, with exception to the mistake in the Leeds game. I feel like it's safer to go Virgil van Dijk, and maybe you can just find another way to Estupinian. But honestly, Perraud's a terrible pick, so I'm actually okay with both options. I would just say Virgil van Dijk is a safer transfer. That's my opinion. Yeah. Do we have any crazy punts? Like, is anyone actually going for like a sub 1% owned player on the free hit? Like something, so like maybe even Iheanacho counts as a crazy punt. Bowen, Madison, Gakpo. I mean, you can look at my team. I've gone for Gakpo. I'm not too fond of Madison. I'm definitely not fond of Bowen. Do we have any Arsenal news? Just curious. Doesn't seem like we have Arsenal news. I think like in around probably 5 to 7 minutes, we'll have to check Andy's stream just to see if... Oh, wow, there's actually a Robert Firmino injury, which means that he'll miss the Nottingham Forest game. I think that's Gakpo stonks, guys. Yeah, I think Gakpo's a super option then, right? I actually completely missed that, and I went for Gakpo anyways. Are you guys all aware of the Firmino injury? Joe Linton. Ooh, okay, that's a pretty out there punt. I'm not gonna lie, but good luck with that. I rate it. That's a proper sub 1% probably ownership punt, effective ownership at least. Gerono says you're planning a minus 16 for Gameweek 34. Why is that? You don't have a free hit for the rest of the season? Nuclear says, will there be doubles in 36? I think so, because it seemed like we got the confirmation that the Newcastle Brighton was confirmed, no? Is that not the case? Surely Jota is the beneficiary for Firmino. Why is that? I mean, Gakpo's been playing center forward. Why would Jota benefit? Jota plays on the left, no? Does starting Raya over Iverson count as a punt? Not really. I actually think Raya will have higher ownership than Iverson. I think that's the opposite of a punt. However, I would recommend doing that. I think that's actually a better move. So, yeah. That's pretty crazy news, actually, for Gakpo. Also, just for the context of Jota, right? Like, Jota has played centre forward before, but recently, in the last 2 matches, Jota's actually clearly playing left wing. So, that's why I think the Firmino injury is huge. Even when you saw, for example, the substitute. You're thinking about FPL. Yeah, okay, I get what you mean, Geronimus. But I was thinking more like positions in terms of the Liverpool starting 11. White, Antonio, Castagne, and Jesus. I'm guilty, actually, of going for an Arsenal defender plus Tony, but I like Castagne and Jesus more for upside. However, I think it's a bit safer to go with Tony and White. I actually think White and Tony is better. But if you really like upside, if you think that Jesus is going to have like a miracle game, then yeah, just go Jesus. Anderson to cover Palace defense. Yeah, that's perfectly. I think he's the best Palace defender that isn't Johnstone. So yeah, go for Anderson. All right, we can still have some pretty crazy deadline news. Trying to see if there's any last minute Arsenal news, because I'm getting a little bit of panic. Just to make sure that I actually cover the news for you guys, just in case we get something. Okay, we just got some FPL Buna bait as well. Don't believe it, guys. So he said no Jesus, Shaka, or Zinchenko today in the starting 11. White not in the squad. That's obviously a fake. Team News and takes account, so don't believe that. There's no Arsenal leak right now. There's no Arsenal leak. I almost got baited there. I was pretty close. Bench Odegaard or Isak? I'd bench Isak 100%. Nuclear Adams says he's very tense about the additional hit for White. You had success with defenders on a hit recently, Virgil van Dijk. I remember Nuclear. I mean, but I think it's not playing your luck, right? Because at the end of the day, Shaw's not going to play. So who else is going to play for you? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just White versus a -2. You have to think about it like that. What's up? You've been thinking about Isak. Why could Wilson not start instead of him after Isak blanking last time? I feel like they're a bit 50-50. I mean, I think you have to think that we're strikers. Like, you like, as a manager as well, you have to see, was Isak actually at fault for that game? Is he the reason why the attack was not gelling? I don't think that's the case, right? Because in that game, Isak was kept on for 90 minutes and the manager was chasing a lead. So I would say that Isak is still firmly within the starting 11. And Wilson produced nothing when he came off the bench in that game as well. So if you want to use that game as an example to suggest that Isak will be benched, I don't think that's a good example. As far as, is there a chance Wilson can start? Absolutely. There's a chance that Wilson can start. But I don't think Isak is a bad option at all. I think he's also had a week of rest. The last time we actually saw him truly get benched was in a midweek match. This is not the case. So I think Isak is quite a safe option for this week. Nothing happened, Kotaro. Don't worry about it. We haven't actually got a proper league. Is there... No, there's no Ben White news, but I can't see a world where Ben White would not start. So I think I would happily go for White. I think Jesus is starting. As far as I'm aware. But there's no kind of confirmation of that, by the way. Yeah, there's no confirmation of what the Arsenal starting lineup is, and there's no leaks. So try to go with your gut. I would say I think in my mind Jesus starts, but yeah, go with your gut, guys. I would bench, as I said, I would 100% bench Isak over Odegaard. I think Odegaard's a better option. Yeah, I can't find any Arsenal news. I would really not worry about it. It's kind of sad that we don't have an Arsenal team leak. I feel like that's probably why some people might not go Jesus, but I generally think Jesus will start. I haven't gone Jesus, but I've already been off Jesus for multiple days. I was even off Jesus before the Arteta press conference. I just really like the other options as well, so that's why I'm not on Jesus. I would not tell people to go off of Jesus, and I don't have any news on that. Best pass defender thinking Mitchell. I mean, honestly, I think they're negligibly different. Like if you have Anderson versus Guehi versus Mitchell, I can't see any of them having like an exceptional attacking haul that I can predict at this moment in time. Is Kilman a good pick in the long term? Honestly, no. For me, not at all. I don't think he's a good pick at all. Like, I'd still give Arsenal a better chance of being well. Like, are you just still thinking about a kind of -4 away from Shaw? Because I don't even like the clean sheet chances for Wolves, particularly, by the way, Nuclear Atoms. Does it make sense to have three? Absolutely makes sense to have three Arsenal midfielders. Absolutely does. I think it makes more sense if you're planning to go Robertson and Trent, because as I said, there's always been like for this week specifically, an issue with going for three defenders that aren't already including, let's say, two of Arsenal and Liverpool, particularly if you go for Trent. Sell March or Matoma. I'd probably, it's so difficult. I'd say I'll sell March. The game week 34 -16 will be to get set for the final 4 weeks for free, essentially. If I choose two match players, give me 33 is Holland, back in for Jesus, then Ederson, Stones, Shaw. Fair enough. I feel like you could probably sidestep the Stones transfer, right? Because wouldn't there be quite a high chance that Stones actually gets rotated, like the same way that he has recently? And not because Stones is a bad player, but simply because Pep wants to rest him. By the way, if you guys would like the stream, that'd be really appreciated. It would be nice to get to 50 likes on this little stream episode. You still haven't taken the hit. You can't find anyone else better than White this week. I think White's perfectly fine. PSB, hey, hope you're doing well. I would go for Solanke, to be honest. I think the expected value is very, very similar between the two players, and ultimately, I think in those instances, I always just back the penalty taker, plus the person with more upside in terms of goal scoring chances. So, yeah, that's kind of my opinion on that one. Because you also think that the EV is actually close because there's a probability as well that Madison will get a clean sheet percentage. So when it comes to actually like pure attack probabilities, like Solanke is just a better option this week. So I quite like going for Solanke. Geronimo says yes, maybe Ake. -40. Oh, you're 44k now. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that -16 does sound pretty hefty, but I can understand if you want to go for a City defender that week. But I think double City defense is probably going to be a differential that week, so good luck with that. But the fear, of course, is you can get rotated even if you're part of the starting 11 with City, just simply because the priority is going to be managing minutes where possible for Pep. So what's a good example of that? Like the Southampton game where you have a catastrophic lead and then John Stones gets subbed off at 45 minutes. Now, on the other hand, the next match, John Stones was also subbed off very, very early, but he scored a screamer. So that's the difference. I feel like that's the tough situation with going for a Man City defender. Whereas with Ederson, you sidestep that, and maybe if you save the -4, it could actually end up panning out as even. Ibrahim says, Kane or Solanke on a free hit will have, I don't like the idea of going for both Kane and Trippier, if I'm being honest. I think Jota is perfectly fine as a pick. It really just depends on if you actually prefer the midfield option. So I liked the forwards this week in terms of alternatives to Liverpool and Arsenal this week. So that's why I've gone for Isak, Tony, and Solanke. So not Solanke, but actually Watkins. But even Solanke, for example, I prefer over most of the midfielders this week. So that's why I'm a little bit higher on Gakpo, because I see Gakpo and Jota as effectively equivalent assets. So the question becomes, what's the alternative? Because you always have to look at these things as if they're pairs. So because I like the forwards more, I kind of like Jota a bit less than Gakpo. But if you were to compare the assets individually, then I think they're actually very close. They're practically the same. And actually, the gambling odds, I think, favor Gakpo just a touch. As far as the question of going back to Kane versus Trippier, as I said, I don't like the idea of hedging versus multiple results, because I think on a free hit, you should really try and play towards certain results. So let's say if I believe that Trippier can keep a clean sheet, and there's a good chance of that, I'd probably keep Trippier, not have Kane in my draft. Whereas, for example, I can totally go for Watkins and Tony because they don't really conflate with each other if they both score. So that's kind of how I feel like it. Almost, it feels like going for Kane, I have to bet on a certain result that's really, really optimal for Trippier. And it feels like at that point, you're probably defensively going for Trippier as opposed to actually thinking that Trippier will do well on points. I always advocate for playing aggressively in terms of getting as much points as possible, so that's why I don't like that. Solanke Solanke is a great option this week for a free hit, but ultimately I still think all three of my forwards are as well, so I'm not too sad, I guess, that I'm missing on Solanke, and ultimately I think his ownership's not that crazy. So Martinelli, Saka, and Jesus start, apparently. Are we sure about that? I feel like have we actually gotten news? I don't think like we've actually gotten a leak. Oh god, we've actually hit the deadline. Fair enough. Pretty tough week, I have to say. I think Isak versus Solanke is probably like where I have probably quite a big differential in Isak, because it seems like a lot of people prefer Solanke to Isak, which is totally fine. I think there's less of a gamble there to be made with Isak, but I did like the idea of attacking Spurs ultimately, so that's why I've gone there. Good luck with the deadline, guys. Oh god, that's tough. I did not make any changes. I'm glad. I think the lesson that I learned in Game Week 2 was was it Game Week 2? There was a Game Week where I changed my captaincy from Haaland to Salah, and I regretted it a lot. So I told myself the lesson learned was that I would never make a deadline move unless it was for reasons based on additional news. But I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and honestly, take care. Hope you guys feel happy with the free hit decisions that you made, wildcards as well. Take care. Went with Kane, took out Trippier for Castagna. Fair enough, that makes sense. At least that's some free hit conviction that I like to see. Good luck, Ben. Good luck, Kataro. Take care, all of you guys. Glad to see you on the stream as well, Nuclear Atoms. I know you moderate for quite a few chats, so I'm not actually sure if you're interested in moderating. But you're in the live stream from time to time, so I'm just asking you openly. Geronos, thank you so much. The cheat sheets is something that I spend a lot of time working on, because I watch practically all the matches on the weekend, and then I look at all the underlying data, and also some models as well, just to make sure that I feel like some of my, at least like my eye test and matches up to what the models think. Or obviously if I feel like maybe my eye test is busted, then I can at least rely on models and underlying data to support how I advocate for certain players going forward. FPL Batata, I've never heard of that, sorry. I do use FPL Review. I use FB Ref to look at expected goals and other statistics as well. I think I also use Mikel Tokbam's transfer algorithm as well. And ultimately, I just watch all the matches basically as much as possible. Player comparison. So I'm not a huge fan of player comparison, because I feel like unfortunately with FPL, it's always about the whole make of your team. So it's always about a full starting 11 or a full starting 15, right? Arguably, especially when you look at something like Bench Boost 29, a lot of us still have residual picks from that 29 week, and that's been the case because Brighton had a blank, then a double, then a blank, then a double. Like those sorts of things necessitate that you have 15 starting players. But ultimately, when you're crafting an FPL team, I think player comparisons are quite poor because you start to think that, okay, this position is locked, but you need to kind of feel like your whole team is in flux from time to time, particularly if you're wildcarding and things like that. So it's good to be open to, for example, like let's say this week I had some friends who really wanted to go for Trent, but then they wanted to go out of Gabriel, which I said, there's no way you should do that. Just go out of Kane instead. These are the kind of options that you think about in terms of like positional flexibility as well in FPL. And I like the idea of using models because it also, even if you had a mental model in your head, I'm not just talking about review, I'm not talking about transfer algorithm, I'm not talking about, Fantasy Football Hub or Scout and their models, but you should have a mental model in your head of effectively the projected points for each player on future game weeks, and then think about how your team can benefit as a whole, right? Because it's about the point ceiling of your team each week, and so you should always be open to transferring out any of the players in your team. Sometimes it doesn't pay out. Sometimes like being active on a deadline can actually hurt you, right? I was active when Saka was supposed to be sick, and then I went for Madison, and probably was a worse transfer overall because, those sorts of circumstances happen. I remember in game week 15, I went out of Haaland because I heard that he was benched. I went straight for Salah, didn't pan out. Sometimes you'll be rewarded in FPL, sometimes you won't. But ultimately, it still makes sense in your head to make moves that you think are based on getting as many points as possible. Like that's all I can say. It's a bit of a trope, but that's correct. I think, for example, some people ask questions on the chat about effective ownership and playing defensively, and I feel like you should try as much as possible not to do that as well. Would you drop the links, use that description? Yeah, absolutely. So I think FPL review. .com is good. Transfer algorithm. I think this is a Patreon service. Top is a Patreon service. FBref.com is great for looking at Premier League statistics. I also use understat.com as well. So the last two are more for expected goals, and the first two are more models really that I actually turn to quite a bit when I look for advice, and just to make sure that my understanding of FPL players is in line with the the order of play based on fixture probabilities and things like that. I think obviously looking at Ben Krellen's fixture probability is I generally think if you play FPL and you actually play with at least one model to support your decision making, because the thing about models that is really nice is that it can help you plan very, very deeply into the future. So for me, like as a human being, I can run an Excel spreadsheet with all the future potential expected points, but even to create those expected points for each individual player is so difficult. So models, you might not believe every single projection, right? Like a lot of people show expected points, you may not believe it, and that's fine. But you're probably not going to have expected points models for every single player for the next 8 to 9 game weeks. So if you're planning that far ahead, models are quite helpful in terms of generally suggesting good ideas of picks, right? It doesn't necessarily will tell, like, I'm not saying use a solver that tells you exactly what move to make, but if you have a rough idea of, let's say, over 8 to 7 game weeks, how good a player could be, like, let's say Mitoma's projected to have 57 points, so on and so forth. Those are the kind of judgment calls that you want to have a look at with the model to support why you're making a transfer, because your transfers outside of a free hit or a wild card specifically is long-term transfer building, but you should be looking at how well transfers can perform over 8 to 9 game weeks really at a time. So that's the kind of information that I would rely on, and models are very helpful for making sure that you make the right decisions based on whether you should take a hit, whether you shouldn't take a hit, etc., etc. But yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely week ahead, and I think that's the stream done as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the free hits. If you didn't free hit, I hope you guys got the right Liverpool, Arsenal assets, so on and so forth. And I hope you guys take care as well. And I'll see you guys next week.